Hey there and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, May 17th, 2021. Happy birthday, Jarrett Green and Yusuf Magid. And I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
The show notes in this week's episode are going to be so long and also probably already out of date by the time this episode goes live, based on how quickly this story is kind of changing on us.
As Trevor touched on there, yeah, everything is rapidly unfolding. It's all very fluid still for our story today. So obviously by the time this goes live at 9 a.m. on Wednesdays, I believe, we're recording this at 8:34 p.m. Central Time on Monday, so a lot will have changed. I will guarantee you there will be elements of this episode that will be out of date. Probably knowing our luck by the time it just gets in recording.
Yeah, exactly. Based on like our track record this week, we will wrap up this episode and news will have broken that we'll have missed.
Yeah. So bear all of that in mind. But as of right now, of 8:34 p.m. CST on Monday, this is the current state of the thing. We're just gonna hop right on into the story, Trev. I think. So yeah, on midday Friday now, IGN published an article called "How to Help Palestinian Civilians." The article made mention of the suffering of the Palestinian civilians in the face of Israeli forces. IGN had made numerous similar posts over the years, including just in the past year, for things like the Black Lives Matter movement, COVID-19, and Asian American hate crimes. At the heart of the article was a list of organizations to donate to help the Palestinian citizens suffering in Jerusalem, Gaza, and the West Bank. It was relatively uncontroversial, or so you would think.
I tweeted about this. Like, that article got me to donate to the Palestinian Children's Fund, I believe, something to that effect. It was basically, it was like I had seen. So, like, prior to this article going live, one of the big kind of lightning rods in the gaming community was Tamoor Hussein put out a video, like a 7.5-minute video, basically talking about, like, hey, this is why this is a thing that people should be paying attention to, and the gaming industry, has, banded together about things like Black Lives Matter and AAPI in recent months, but they're not doing it around what's going on in Palestine in the same way, and he kind of, like, highlighted and exposed that to the community. And so I remember seeing his video, watching his video, and being like, this is very valuable, and I'm going to try and like educate myself, but I don't know like where to point my efforts in a way that I had with like BLM and StopAAPIHate.org and stuff like that. And so the IGN article that came out was a great resource for that had like, hey, here are a handful of organizations that are doing good things related to all this. And so, like, that was the thing that got me to be like, oh, okay, this is where I can put some money towards, and help out in that way. So yeah, that was like it did the intent. It worked on people like me, and millions of others, or not maybe not millions of others, but thousands, lots of others.
Sure. Exactly, it did what it was supposed to do. However, over the weekend, the post and the tweet that had accompanied it were quietly deleted, along with a similar one by Game Informer as well, who had also had a post go live. No notice at all was made when it occurred. No comment was given until at 2:20 a.m. Eastern Time, prime news hour. Monday, IGN put out a tweet that included the following lines, quote, "By highlighting only one population, the post mistakenly left the impression that we were politically aligned with one side," end quote. And it was, quote, "not our intention, and we sincerely regret the error," end quote. In the face of such a galling and shocking statement was the added news that not a single member of the IGN editorial team was consulted or spoken to before the tweet went out in the middle again of the night, when most of the West Coast IGN-based team would be asleep. Really, all of the US-based team would be asleep, I guess. As you might imagine, that didn't sit well with some people. And shortly before we sat down to record tonight's episode, literally just a few hours before, members of the IGN editorial team wrote an open letter to Ziff Davis and J2 Global, the parent companies of IGN. That included lines such as,
real quick,
quote,
I want to expand. It's not just confined to the editorial team. It's a
Sure.
wide breadth of the staff at IGN.
Great shout out. The actual staff of IGN, we should say. Included lines including, quote, "We, the undersigned employees of IGN, are appalled by the recent management decision to subvert our editorial autonomy and remove our posts directing aid to the Palestinian civilians currently suffering a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the West Bank, and Jerusalem," end quote. It continued, quote, "In our original post, we offered our readers ways to support charities that help injured and sick children, supply educational resources and food assistance to victims, and provide emergency medical relief for those wounded or displaced by the conflict. We feel those efforts should not be controversial. All humans deserve access to basic rights." The letter continued to point out that the original post was taken down in the middle of the night, with no one from the editorial team consulted and with no reason or explanation given to the members of the IGN team. It included with, quote, "wholesale removal of pieces without posting an explanatory statement is expressly against our policy," end quote. Continued, quote, "We feel the decision to remove the original article and social post, as well as the subsequent statement from management, is not only actively harmful to IGN's public reputation and its employees, but also highly disrespectful to much of its content team and broader staff." Finally, the letter contained the following passage. Quote, "Following an IGN-wide meeting this morning, we've come to understand that this was a clear instance of corporate overreach and demonstrated blatant disregard for the most basic standards of journalistic integrity and editorial independence," end quote. The letter, as of, again, 8:34 p.m., has been signed by 71 members of the IGN team and counting. Trevor, this is a lot to unpack. Again, it's also, as we've touched on, very fluid still, all kind of still going as we are recording. But what are your initial thoughts on just everything that has happened in the past 72 hours, roughly?
Yeah, it's so Cameron and I sat down yesterday morning and recorded That Nerdy Site show for this week, which went live today. That we're recording this on Monday, and as I kind of mentioned before we started recording, most of that episode is just like us talking about Final Fantasy XIV news and our first like early Mass Effect impressions and stuff. But at the end of the episode, when I went to throw to Cameron for plugs and stuff, he basically delved into the Palestine conflict, and we kind of talked about the ways people can help, and we referenced the IGN article that at the time was at the time that we were recording it had probably been taken down, but we didn't know that yet because when we started recording, it was up and had been a powerful force for good. And so we were talking about that, and basically, we wrapped up the podcast, and immediately I see on Twitter people talking about, hey, the article's missing. What's going on? Like, it got taken down. Why is it doing a 404 error? And so I immediately kind of like recorded a little insert of like, hey, it would appear that this is probably some sort of corporate overreach, and like IGN's parent companies have stepped in to remove the site that we kind of and the article that we were referencing. So here are so I'm going to include other resources in the post and stuff, and I did, and I shared those out with kind of the tweet that we did promoting the episode this morning. And yeah, it was very interesting at that point to see like a lot of the staff kind of like being taken aback. Like people weren't, like IGN staff weren't tweeting about it so much as like they were tweeting like vague reactions of like, shock, disbelief or anger or like because, and as we have since found out, basically because they didn't know what was going on either. And then fast forward, some 14, 16 hours or whatever to, like almost midnight Pacific time last night. And the IGN Twitter account posts that bullshit statement presenting themselves as a unified front using like text of like we and stuff, which
We,
obviously the editorial team did not have any input or insight into. And pretty much everybody, again, at that point, like you could go and look around at the IGN people who were awake and tweeting, and there were lots of like angry gifs and stuff being shared, and pretty much everybody else around, like, you know, the rest of us as outsiders were kind of looking at that and saying like, this is bullshit. This is 1000% bullshit. And basically that news has continued to break throughout the day. As more IGN people started, you know, waking up and responding this morning. Clearly they seem to have been working on this response behind the scenes, but we had, you know, articles from Kotaku going up over the weekend kind of commenting on things. You had GamesIndustry.biz as well. And then late in the like maybe an hour or two before the IGN employees like posted their open letter, Patrick Klepek had written up kind of a report on Vice, with, you know, unnamed IGN people kind of commenting and giving some insight to the staff meeting they had this morning, where a lot of angry staffers were trying to get answers on what happened, why this happened, and get the organization to take accountability for those actions. And then, yeah, the timeline kind of has, for the moment-ish, concluded with this letter, which at publishing had 66 names, but as Logan kind of mentioned, has already had more names attached to it and added to it. And I've seen some people at IGN kind of commenting like, you know, it was a tight turnaround on this, so, you know, don't be surprised if more people continue to add their names to the thing. Rebecca Valentine also pointed out something that's very, I think, important to mention in this context is like, don't speculate about who isn't on the list and why they might not be. There's any number of reasons for names to not be included. So if you're looking at that and saying like, I wonder why this person isn't on there, like, that's not the point of this. And there could be any number of very legitimate reasons for not attaching their name to this kind of thing. So yeah, it's been very fascinating. I've seen now in kind of the aftermath of the open letter, like the Washington Post is picking this up and writing about it, and I imagine we'll see, you know, it get probably a little bit more, you know, hopefully wider coverage over this whole thing. And as I tweeted out, like, I couldn't be prouder of the team behind the letter, you know, standing up for what they believe in, and what clearly looked like and has, you know, proven out to be Ziff Davis and J2 Global basically saying like, hey, we don't appreciate this. We don't like, I mean, one of the things that is certainly likely a facet of this is the response that IGN Israel had made in response to the original post. Because for those that don't know, IGN has a lot of kind of like global subsidiaries that
basically
are
like franchisees almost,
that you know are part of the IGN team, but also often run somewhat autonomously for their specific regions, and so yeah, IGN Israel basically like put out a tweet condemning the original post in support of Palestinian efforts, and so that likely played a role. I believe that tweet has also been deleted, but you know was screenshotted and exists on the internet now. So yeah, it's likely that played some role, and just this being a more global incident, I suppose, than your Black Lives Matters or your LGBTQ initiatives that IGN has, you know, proudly partaken in the past, the Stop AAPI Hate, like all of those can have a more confined U.S., you know, reach, even though they are, you know, global implications. A lot of the focus on those was locally in our kind of neck of the woods versus this overseas, very long running and very, you know, hot button issue. So I imagine like all of those factors played a role in some shitty executives at J2 Global saying like, hey, like we need to pull this, and we're the publisher, so we're going to do it, and they did.
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, I would be remiss if I didn't also give a shout out to the IGN South Africa team,
Yes.
who reposted the original post for a couple hours, I think an hour maybe, before it was taken back down again, and doing that definitely by that point knowing the consequences of that action, I'm sure,
Yeah.
to everyone involved. So, absolute shout out to them. No, I mean, I think that the decision by the corporate owners of IGN is just incredibly gutless and despicable, right? For ignoring the obvious humanitarian issues, let's just put that aside for a second. And let's talk about, let's say they gave, The Last of Us Part 2 a 5 out of 10 or something like that. Any sort of corporate owner overreach to any extent, but especially something like this, where they take down the post, take down the incumbent social media post, with no message, with no warning, with no consultation, with no discussion with the people who were involved in the editorial side of teams, is, as the open letter from the IGN staff made mention of, is a blatant example of corporate overreach, and flies in the face of virtually every single journalistic principle and idea of journalistic integrity. So for that alone, I think it's incredibly despicable and gutless on there. But then to take into account the fact that there is a raging humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza, Jerusalem, and the West Bank right now, and as the open letter made mention of, the things that the organizations they were included in the post were for such simple and basic and so clearly, obviously inoffensive things. They're for emergency medical supplies for those who are wounded, right? It's for like educational assistance things. It's for food. It's for basic amenities. Like
the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund is the one that I supported as a result of the thing, which is like, children are being injured and dying in this conflict.
Yes.
It's not hard to get behind supporting the children.
Save the children, right? Like, this is not an inoffensive, like, this is not a crazy thing we're trying to pitch here, right? We are trying to just save kids and give them food, shelter, water, and allow them to afford them an education now that half of their buildings are destroyed, basically, right? But that was still a bridge too far for the management team here, and the corporate team here, I should say. I mean, I just think it's absolutely disgusting, right? And it smacks of every worst fear for actual larger sites as well, right? I mean, this is IGN.com. Usually, we're talking about dumb, fun video game stuff, or not so fun video game stuff, but video game stuff nonetheless. It's about toys, right? But I mean, Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, right? And Jeff Bezos has been good to the Washington Post. He's given them a lot of money to hire new journalists and to fund new projects and all that kind of stuff. But maybe he could just say, I don't like that particular story, right? Like, this is the worst nightmare of every rich, either corporate owner or billionaire owner taking over a newspaper, is they do these kind of things. You're seeing it play out right now, right?
I think you're more versed in the sports world. Was it Deadspin last year or like 2 years ago that had like a big hubbub around a similar kind of thing where like the corporate overlords kind of stepped in and removed some posts, and like a shit ton of Deadspin people walked. Am I thinking of the right site?
You're 100% right. Yeah. I mean, Deadspin in particular has just been kind of gutted in the last few years because of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
I think, and I mean, that to me is a prime example, right? I mean, that site is not what it was 2 years ago at all, even, right? It is completely transformed. And I think that's the nightmare scenario, right? Like, the name is still there, but what is that site now, right? And I think that's what everyone's always afraid of when these kind of rich owners come in, and the stakes are admittedly lower with the video games, but that much higher when you see them take on something that is very important and very, very, very fundamental to lots of people, and then it's just brushed aside with no conversation, right? There's almost no part of the series of steps taken by the corporate owners that isn't terrible, right? Like it is almost a comedy of villainy, right? Like they went to almost every single worst case thing they could do, and they did that all along every single step of the way, right? To have like the decision to have just no conversation with anyone involved on the Torah side of the team is just so beyond any sort of comprehension that I can't even understand it, right? I don't know what the kind of long-term next ramifications are. The open letter continued with them, the IGN staff, requesting the piece be put back up. They're open to kind of making any sort of, or open to hearing what kind of changes the corporate interest would want, but they want the piece back up, and they want an all-hands meeting with everyone involved in the decision to remove the piece by Friday as well. And yeah, I don't know what is going to happen, right? This is such a huge thing that has just snowballed so unnecessarily, right? Like, this is, to me, a thing where if you're Ziff Davis or J2 Global and you, on Sunday, are like, we don't like this piece about them wanting to help people in Palestine because fuck them, I guess. I don't know. I'm a cartoon villain. And so, but if that's what you're thinking, okay, fine. And you have a conversation, say, hey, let's talk about how we make this better, maybe. But in taking it down and not letting anyone know, you've turned what was basically a weekend-long fundraising event and turned it into a larger site-wide controversy and a way bigger story than it otherwise would have been, right? Like, this is, to me, the John Oliver story of the guy who sued to get his internet story off the internet, and now the first thing you Google whenever you see a guy is just the story about him trying to get this story removed from the internet, right? And in, like, everyone knows IGN had this thing about Palestine now. Like, no one doesn't know. It's all there now. It's way bigger in the news cycle, and instead of it being in the news for a weekend, as they did it maybe Monday and Tuesday as well, it's going to dominate the entire week in the industry as well, if not longer, depending on what happens.
Yeah.
Has infuriated your staff. They're all they're just furious at the decisions that were made, and still hasn't fixed the essential issue, right? Where everyone is still talking about this, and the staff still wants peace to go back live, obviously. Mm-hmm. So you've just shot yourself in the foot for no reason, and you didn't even solve the problem that you wanted to solve to begin with. I mean, it is just like clearly no one thought through this decision at all, at almost any level, for the corporate side of IGN.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that is certainly kind of like the unspoken threat that exists is E3 is right around the corner. And so if all of these people just suddenly decide to take some vacation time or not show up here in like a couple weeks' time,
maybe they all get the flu.
IGN is going to be crippled in terms of like its content output during its biggest time of the year. And that's like, there's complications, of course, because obviously IGN is not a union house and doesn't have, union protection. So Ziff Davis could, at the end of the day, just say, fuck, anybody that signed their name to that list is fired. We're like, and they don't need cause or anything like that. And so it's a brave thing that all those people did put their name on there. And I, coupled with that, I was seeing a lot of people this morning basically saying like, man, if I was at IGN, I would resign because of that. And I'm like, that is coming from like, and it was almost exclusively people from like a place of privilege that sure, they could, it'd be great if this was, a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington kind of, moment, and hurrah, like the team gets together and says, you know what, we're not going to take this anymore. They all quit and walk out or something like that. But that's a bunch of people that are walking away from livelihoods, in many cases dream jobs, in an industry that has very few of those to offer. And so like the idea of like, you need to jump to that extreme, I was annoyed that I was seeing people make that like call to action to the IGN staffers, because again, I think that's like speaking from an incredibly unrealistic point of privilege. Like even if they were like, you know what, I I can't deal with this. Doing that right now in an industry or in an economy that has been devastated by COVID over the last year, and jobs are incredibly scarce in and out of the industry. Like doing, like just saying like, well, this fucking thing happened, so now I'm just going to walk away from that is like incredibly unrealistic and stupid. So I just wanted to weigh in on that too.
I think even more so. I mean, I can't remember who it was, so forgive me for not getting the correct mention, but someone had a Twitter thread too of like, also, the majority of these people live in the most expensive city in the entire country where they have like 3 or 4 roommates, right? And like, this is just their reality, right? Like, this is just what it is like to work at IGN probably. And even the ones who don't, you're still in San Francisco, California. So even if you manage to somehow buy a house and have a family there, you're still in San Francisco, and you're not going to get a job immediately after this probably. And it's that thing for me of, I understand the initial gut reaction of just people being angry online, seeing, I mean, like, they should just quit, right? Like, that immediate gut reaction, I understand, but it's then that second thought of being like, well, let's think about this for a second of why they're not going to do this, because they all have lives and jobs and kids potentially, or significant others, or just their own bills.
just fucking ridiculous rent.
Yeah, and so I think just some sort of moment to like take a deep breath and say, I am very angry, but also I understand why they can't necessarily do this while still holding the thread of, hey, 71 of us are saying something needs to give here, something needs to change. And that's not an insignificant amount of the IGN family at all. As you mentioned, I think it was incredibly brave of each and every one of the 71 and counting people who put their name on that. That statement uses very strong language, as it should, but also does so in a very measured, I think, tone, and one that I think is something that is fueled by passion and emotion, but has been kind of tempered with reason and patience and forethought. And I think it's an incredibly well-written open letter, written with bravery and written because this is a principled stand on multiple different fronts. Yeah, I mean, this is not, to me, an instance where it is hard to identify who is in the right and who is in the wrong. The issue, of course, is that we're in a corporate ownership capitalist situation where right and wrong doesn't necessarily always matter. Hopefully it does here. Hopefully the post can go live with whatever, modifications need to be made. But make no exception about this. It is unambiguous and totally without question that the Israeli military is murdering Palestinian civilians. And whether it is with cause or without cause, that fact is inarguable. It is just a reality of situation on the ground. Whatever Hamas or other organizations in Gaza or the West Bank may be doing doesn't destroy the fact that Palestinian civilians are being killed in far, far, far greater numbers than anyone in Israel.
And it doesn't stop the fact that they bombed the building that housed the AP and Al Jazeera.
Press, yeah, that's what I was going to
Which is like almost it is cartoonishly villain to that level of like that. The primary intent of that is arguably to stop news from like getting out about this story.
From arguably the world's most
respected sources,
respected source in the entire world, which is the Associated Press, one of the oldest kind of journalistic organizations in the world, and then Al Jazeera, another one who is going to give no ground to Israel either. I think it is clearly an act to silence the criticism and silence the stories on there. And while we here at That News You Care About and That News Site at Large, we're very much happy and rejoiced at the results of the November presidential election, I will also say, certainly for myself, if not for Trevor as well, that I've been very disappointed in the reaction of the Biden administration and the reaction of Joe Biden thus far. It is not they're not mutually exclusive to say Israel, of course, has the right to defend itself, as every nation does. This is not what is occurring maybe as well, though, and the right to defend yourself doesn't extend to the right to annihilate an entire people group, right? I think, as Trevor might love, of the classic West Wing episode about the death penalty, right? Where you have, the Torah says you have the right to, defend yourself. You don't have the right to vengeance, right? Like, you have the right to, a society has the ability to kind of be just, but it doesn't have the right to kill, right? Like, you have the ability and you have the right to defend your borders, defend your people within them. You don't have the right to unleash Armageddon on Gaza and the West Bank when your military is significantly more powerful than anything the Palestinian civilians have.
Yeah. I had this is a story that I very much have been in the dark on, admittedly. Like, I was very ignorant of a lot of what's going on over there, and so I've taken some time over the last few days to do some reading and research onto it and try and get a better grasp on it, because as I tweeted out, it is very like the narrative all of my life has been there's just always war in the Middle East. It's just like it's so far over there. There's nothing that can be done to fix it, and America has always been an ally to Israel, and so like growing up, it's like we're almost indoctrinated into thinking that. And when you do look into these stories and you see the basically war crimes that Israel is committing against a lot of the Palestinian people, it's devastating. The West Wing reference that I would have pulled, or that I was going to pull with you, in learning about the Iron Dome this week, would have been that episode where Leo McGarry is very excited to show Bartlett this missile that can stop another missile, and it doesn't work. But obviously that was 20 plus years ago, and the technology exists now, and so seeing like the especially Last Week Tonight with John Oliver did a great kind of like 5-minute story on this this whole kind of thing, touching on the Israel has a right to defend itself stock line that every president gives, basically. Talking about the Iron Dome and how, like Hamas is shooting missiles into Israel, but because the technology on this thing works, a whole bunch of those missiles aren't ever hitting their target because they're being intercepted by one of the most powerful militaries in the world. Meanwhile, like Hamas and the people of Palestine do not have such defense measures against Israel's airstrikes and attacks, and so like they're getting devastated. And again, the John Oliver piece in particular talks about like this is one of those things you can't both sidesism, which is what the IGN article, or the IGN response in quotes, is effectively trying to do, because like it is drastically disproportionate, the way this conflict is impacting the people of Israel versus the people of Palestine.
I think for me too is the reality that you kind of touch on this. So often we want to paint the Middle East at large, but in particular anything involving Israel and Palestine, as a millennia-old conflict, right? Isaac and Ishmael, they've been at this for that long, right? And that's just not the reality of the situation between Israel and Palestine, right? This conflict is barely 100 years old. It is very modern. It is very recent. And it wasn't really exacerbated until, at like its peak, until World War II and its aftermath. Our grandparents remember this crisis, this conflict not occurring in their lifetimes. This is not some ancient primal feud here. This is within the past 70 or so years. I think it's also incredibly important to say that Israel's relationship with the United States is really unique in a lot of ways, as is Israel's relationship with a lot of countries in the world, because of the nature of what Israel is and how it came to be, right? I mean, the Jewish people were victims of arguably the greatest humanitarian crisis in history with the Holocaust. And the scars of that are also still recent and still fresh. There are millions of survivors of the Holocaust still around. That said, the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu, first off, is not the Jewish people as a monolith. And the Jewish people, it should be said, and the Israeli people, it should be said, are not a monolithic entity either. And there are many people from those two communities who have come out in support of the Palestinian movement. To say nothing of the fact that one person's trauma or one culture's trauma does not allow them to inflict a trauma on another. And the traumas of the Israeli founders, if you will, in the 1940s does not give them carte blanche to just traumatize generations of Palestinian civilians as well, right? You can't just use your trauma and the same cycle going back again and again and again to how we came into being in Israel as an excuse to slowly but surely just try to wipe out all the Palestinian civilians around you. That is also still a war crime, and that is also still a crime against humanity in its most blatant sense, right? And it should be also mentioned, because I want to say it, that Benjamin Netanyahu is just a piece of shit. And this is my 2-tweet thread that I put out as well. Was I had a whole tweet in support of Palestine, and then I just said, and Benjamin Netanyahu is just a tin pot wannabe dictator who is just at his core rotten and is a despicable person. And every single line I've seen and read from him in the past week or so, we'll say, has reaffirmed that, right? He lives in a reality that is not true, and he lives in a world that isn't true. And I think the consequences have been devastating for Israel's own citizens over his, decade-long plus prime ministership, and then also for the Palestinian civilians around him. I think, first off, this is another reminder that elections matter and they have huge consequences. And second off, this is a reminder that Palestine is being, to put it mildly, bullied. And to be more blunt about it, is being systemically pushed from their homeland until there will be nothing left for them to have a homeland at. There'll be no claim they can make to any sort of homeland, right? The progress Israel has made in the past few decades, moving into settlements that would have been considered part of Israel's territory, has had devastating consequences and has only emboldened far-right politicians in that country like Benjamin Netanyahu to be more aggressive and to be more blunt and to be just more dehumanizing to those that they seek to defeat. Mm-hmm. And the consequences of that are being laid bare in the past week or so. So I would also make note of that. And again, say that that's the IGN post said.
Yeah, I saw some image, I can't find it now, but I saw basically like right before we hopped on to record, I saw somebody on Twitter post an image that was effectively a protester, an Israeli protester, basically saying like, my grandparents didn't suffer the Holocaust to, drop bombs on Gaza. Like that's not what they would have wanted. So it's very disappointing that Benjamin Netanyahu is absolutely like exploiting that kind of mentality, like the mentality behind the trauma of the Holocaust and the suffering that the Jewish people and Israelites and whatnot have suffered over the years, to inflict those same horrors on the Palestinians. I'll include this in the shoutouts along with so many other links and facets of the show. But I want to in that vein, I want to give a shout out to Yusuf Magid. Had a great kind of 16 tweet thread talking about basically a short history of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, where he kind of broke down him and Tamoor were kind of two of the first people I saw really shining a spotlight on this in a, as sad as it is to say, a digestible manner, that helped kind of kickstart, I think, a lot of the conversation that we're seeing around the industry around this topic in particular.
I think, we will include many resources, and our show notes will be quite long this week, but I think rightfully so. I will say, as perhaps a final thing on the overall thing, it's really easy to play ignorant. And I think me and Trevor have tried to use News You Care About in its, relatively short run to highlight the fact that we are both incredibly lucky and incredibly privileged in our lives. And I think, we don't know a lot of people's experiences because we are white, straight males in our 20s and 30s. The world, as I often say, is kind of made for us. But it's not made for a lot of people. Most people, in fact. And there's so many resources to learn more about the conflict in Israel and Palestine, to learn more about what has been going on in Gaza and the West Bank over the past few decades. And it's never been acceptable, but it is certainly no longer acceptable in the past few years to just play ignorant and to say, I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to begin to learn more about the situation. This episode's show notes will have so many resources. I encourage everyone to go check out Tamoor Hussein's video. I encourage everyone to go check out Yusuf Magid's video and figure out for yourself. You don't need to agree with every single one of Yusuf Magid's tweets or Tamoor Hussein's analysis or any of the people's analysis, but consume the media, consume the content, read articles, read tweets, watch videos, learn about the situation yourself, and make an informed decision and understand what is going on in the world. You can no longer play ignorant. The world itself is far too intimate and close and interconnected now for that to be acceptable any longer. And their information to grasp the knowledge is so easily accessible now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have
it
in the internet,
literally at our fingertips.
Yeah, we have in the internet just the encyclopedia of the entire world at our fingertips, like Trevor said, and there's no excuse not to learn. And especially if you have the privilege to not be affected by what is going on, whether it is this or whether it was, Asian American hate crimes, or whether it was Black Lives Matters, or any other of the million causes that have been going on in the last few years. If you have the privilege to not be affected by them, you have to use that privilege and the responsibility and power that comes with it to help make a difference for those communities. And this is clearly a case where lots of people can do something, and it is incredibly simple. It does not take a lot of effort to do something, whether it is donating to the organizations, or there was posting a tweet, just spreading the word out to a larger audience. Every single thing makes a difference.
Yeah. To quote the prior week's last week tonight, in a piece that, like, in a completely unrelated piece where they talked about basically African American hair, the kind of tag at the end of it was a few celebrities like Craig Robinson, basically like. When people ask about, what's the deal with black person's hair or something like that, like don't ask me, fucking Google it. And basically that was the mantra, is like, things are so easily accessible. I hate so often people like asking these questions on Twitter or in a Facebook group or something like that, where it's like, why are you coming to those places for this like information when it would have been easier to Google it. The old, joke site, let me Google that for you, or whatever, where like somebody asks you a question, oh, let me type that into, let me Google that for you, and it gives you a video of how you Google that thing that you're asking about. Like, Google exists. Bing exists to a certain extent if you really want to go that way, but like, the information is out there. Pretty much every major news site right now is going to have articles that are, a brief guide to the Israeli-Palestine conflict that can absolutely help you get up to speed. We will absolutely have a ton of articles and resources linked in our show notes that will, point you in the direction of those kinds of resources and articles. So, yeah, it is easier than ever to get this information, and you have to be lazier than ever to not seek it out.
The final thing I will say is a tweet that is already live as of recording this and as of you listening to this, which is We obviously stand with the entire IGN staff and support them and the incredibly brave steps they've taken in the past 4 or 5 hours, or however long it's been since the letter went live. And we firmly stand behind them and all journalists, including those at Game Informer who are also affected, have the ability to speak freely their mind, including when it comes to posting a fundraising effort for dying and wounded kids in Palestine, which should itself, again, not be controversial. Trevor, in one of the hardest pivots we've made in a while, you have a shout out for this episode as well.
So I have a handful of shout outs, and I'll go ahead and kind of stay on topic first for some of those shout outs.
Okay. We'll ease into it.
So yeah, kind of touching on this, a lot of our friends and peers in the industry are doing fundraising efforts. The folks over at Kind of Funny are going to be doing a stream this Friday in support of the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. And you can support them at kindoffunny.com/Palestine, or you can check out the stream on Friday. They had set a goal of like $10,000 this morning, and they've already pushed past that and basically have raised their limit to $15,000. And I'm looking at it right now. They're at $15,003, so they've passed that stretch goal 5 days ahead of the stream. So you can go continue to support them and help the cause that they're trying to support. Similarly, Tamoor Hussein, again, who was, could arguably be pointed to as like the kicking off point in a lot of this, because he got a lot of the industry talking about it by raising awareness of it. He's streaming every day this week, so you can follow him at twitch.tv/TamoorH, TAMOORH, and he has a donate link as well. He is supporting medical aid for Palestinians at Medical Aid Pal on Twitter. And then, as I said, I'll shout out to Yusuf's tweet thread as well that I mentioned earlier. And then in the ridiculous dumb pivot that, had this not been a story this week, this might have been a fun story to kind of like discuss and speculate on, so I wanted to give it some love. Jeff Grubb, of GamesBeat / VentureBeat, basically kind of he tweeted out over the weekend kind of a confirmation based on his sources that yes, Starfield, the upcoming Bethesda space saga, is going to be Xbox exclusive. Or Xbox and PC exclusive, and he basically wrote kind of a continued editorial or expounding on that of like, not only does he have sources supporting that, but here's kind of the opinion piece of why that makes sense, like why it makes sense that they're going to do this as a way to grow Game Pass subscribers compared to something like Minecraft, which they can put on other platforms because Minecraft itself is a platform, and that works best when it is available to everyone, just like Fortnite and those other things. So kind of speaking to a lot of the, but maybe they'll put it on PlayStation kind of people. He kind of put up a thing on that. So it's basically, just an editorial he wrote, why Starfield won't be on PlayStation 5. That any other week would have been a fun topic to discuss on the show, but here is relegated to shout-out category.
Otherwise, that is the show. I usually have a regular rigmarole. This week's is going to be a little bit different. In lieu of everything. So instead of telling us to go over to patreon.com/thatnerdsite, where you can go support us as always, or instead of telling you to go to our YouTube page, like, subscribe, share, or instead of telling you to go give us 5 stars on iTunes, or all the other stuff I usually tell you to do, I'm going to, again, direct you to any of the number of available resources and organizations to support those in Palestine. Again, there will be a whole host of them in the show notes. I also encourage you to go check out Kind of Funny's stream, Tamoor Hussein's stream, and lots of others that are going on across the industry. You pretty much just have to open video game Twitter and you can't miss it. And encourage you to go direct those resources there for this week. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, I assume, I have a idea of what your shout out will be this week, but what are you going to shout out for this week if you have any shouts or plugs you want to make?
So one of the things I will shout out the That Nerdy Site Show episode where, yeah, like Cameron and I kind of bullshit about other things for like the first, hour and 40 minutes or whatever, and then get really into a lot of the Palestine stuff at the last 15 minutes of it for that show, which is arguably like the most important 15 minutes of that show. So you can check that out. Also, this week is all about Cuphead in the Let's Plays on our YouTube channel. But yeah, like that's all. Like that'll all be there anytime people want to go check it out. But I kind of echo the sentiment of like encouraging people to like try and learn something new. Like use these incredible devices and resources we have all around us to educate yourself a little bit on Palestine, like a lot of us have been this last week, and everything that's going on over there. And again, as kind of Tamoor touched on. Oh, another shout out in the vein of everything is the Kind of Funny Games Daily from Monday today, because it was Blessing and Tim and Tamoor came on and guested. They basically spent the first half hour talking about this IGN story before the IGN staff, released any kind of comment. But they're talking about that, and so that's another kind of good conversation that I think happened around this whole topic. But as Tamoor kind of touched on there, as well as in I think his original video, we're so conditioned to think this is such a giant story and like this giant history that kind of, as Logan mentioned earlier as well, that like it becomes too difficult to even broach the subject, and that is, as a lot of people will tweet out, that is basically like a tool of the oppressors to like try and control the narrative of like, hey, yeah, don't, like, there's no point in digging into this because it is so big. That is absolutely the narrative they want you to buy into. And yeah, you're not going to learn everything overnight. You're not going to learn everything from a few articles, but it's a step, and it's a step in the direction of educating yourself. And just looking at the news this last week, you can pretty easily see that this is a very unbalanced conflict in a number of ways, and so hopefully, as more people kind of become aware of that and become open to it, they'll reach out and file petitions to people like Joe Biden and basically say, hey, like as a country, we should rethink our policy on this because we should not be backing the war crimes, and our hands are not at all clean on this. We've supported Israel for years. We send them, we sell them the bombs that they're dropping on the Palestinians, and it's horrifying. So like our hands are not clean in this, and the more we recognize and can confront that, I think that's the only way to get things to change for the better.
I 100% agree. You can go find me at LeftyLogie or LeftyLoggy. I think one of the things that you touched on that I also will shout out and echo is the idea that framing it as something that is millennia old, I think makes it so disheartening. How do you solve something that is millennia old, right? I'm not the smartest. You're like, it's so easy to then fall into that idea of, well, I'm not the smartest person in the room. I'm certainly not the smartest person in the world. What difference can I make if all of the brilliant people that have come before me over the centuries and millenniums haven't been able to figure this out? This just is an unsolvable problem, right? There is no solution to it, right? And that's patently not true. It's on so many levels. And I think it's so clearly a way to just grind down any sort of opposition to it by just saying it's biblical, it is ancient, it is primordial almost, right? How do you solve those kinds of problems? And I think, as Trevor just touched on, you don't solve it overnight, whether it's ancient or whether it's 100 years old. You solve it step by step, day by day, and you just learn a little bit more every day. You read a couple articles every day. You watch a video or two every day, and you are a more informed, more enlightened citizen and member of both the country and global communities, right? It's that simple, right? Rome wasn't built in a day, and you will be surprised how quickly you pick up things after a day of just reading a couple articles and watching a couple videos, right? They lay a foundation for you to then build off. And I would absolutely encourage everyone to go check out just any piece of content involving it, and just learn and read and consume media about what's going on in Palestine. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, again, we stand with the IGN staff. Fuck Ziff Davis. And for myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games, and please, please be good to each other.